In the vast darkness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, one truth echoes through every corner of the galaxy. Never underestimate the species that crawled out of a gravity well so deep it should have crushed their dreams before they learned to fly. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled for 3,000 years. Their crystalline ships cut through space like elegant dancers. Their energy weapons could vaporize moons, and their tactical brilliance had conquered 17 star systems without a single defeat. They had never encountered a species quite like humanity. Beings who looked at impossible odds and smiled, who turned desperation into innovation, and who had a disturbing tendency to win wars they had no business surviving. Today, above the burning world of Kepler, 442b, that truth would be written in starfire and steel. The greatest armada in galactic history had gathered to witness what they believed would be humanity's final surrender. Instead, they were about to learn why Earth's children had earned whispered names in alien tongues, names that meant the ones who refuse to die, the species that fights with broken ships, and most terrifying of all, the humans who laugh in the face of extinction. The battlefield held its breath, waiting for the moment when legend would become reality. Admiral Zexkay stood on the bridge of his flagship, the crystalline vessel Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical display with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. The hologram before him showed the orbital space around Kepler, 442b, where the last human colony struggled against the inevitable. 300 Zephyrian warships hung in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming like captured starlight, energy weapons charged and ready to deliver the killing blow to humanity's desperate rebellion. "Status report," Zexkay commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 3 millennia of imperial conquest. His 4 arms moved gracefully across the control interface, each gesture precise and calculated. "All battle groups are in position, Admiral," reported Commander Velthas, her own crystalline features reflecting the tactical displays. "The human colony's defensive grid has been reduced to 37% effectiveness. Their orbital platforms are offline, and our siege has cut all supply routes. Intelligence estimates their remaining forces can hold for no more than 6 standard days." Zexkay nodded with satisfaction. The humans had proven surprisingly stubborn during their brief encounter with the Empire, but stubbornness could not overcome superior technology and numbers. Their ships were crude things made of metal and desperation, powered by chemical reactions and primitive fusion drives that belonged in a museum rather than a battlefield. Yet somehow, these primitive vessels had managed to destroy 17 Zephyrian ships before the siege began, a feat that still puzzled the Admiral's tactical staff. "What of their distress signals?" Zexkay asked, though he already knew the answer. The humans had been broadcasting on every known frequency, sending desperate pleas for reinforcement to any who might listen. Such calls had gone unanswered for months. "No response detected from any human vessels, Admiral. Our deep space sensors show empty void in all directions." "They are alone." The bridge crew, composed of the Empire's finest officers, allowed themselves a moment of what passed for satisfaction among their species. The Zephyrians had built their civilization on the principle of elegant warfare, swift, decisive victories that minimized resource expenditure while maximizing psychological impact. The siege of Kepler 442b would serve as a perfect example for future conquests. Down on the planet's surface, the human colony of New Harmony burned under constant bombardment. The settlement, once home to 2 million souls, had been reduced to underground bunkers and desperate last stands. The Zephyrians had offered surrender terms weeks ago, complete submission in exchange for preservation as a client species. The humans had responded by destroying their own communication arrays and intensifying their resistance. Captain Sarah Chen pressed her back against the reinforced concrete of Bunker 7, feeling the vibrations of another orbital strike shake dust from the ceiling. Her armor was scarred and patched, her rifle low on ammunition, but her eyes still held the fierce determination that had carried humanity from their homeworld to the stars. Around her, the remnants of the Colonial Defense Force prepared for what might be their final battle. "Ma'am!" called Sergeant Martinez from his position near the scanner array. "We're picking up massive energy signatures in orbit. The Zephyrs are moving into final bombardment formation." Chen nodded grimly. They had known this moment would come. The siege had stretched on longer than anyone expected, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Zephyrian Empire commanded resources beyond human comprehension, while New Harmony had only its people and their stubborn refusal to yield. "All units, this is Command Actual." Chen spoke into her communication device, knowing her words would reach every human defender across the colony. "We've received word that orbital bombardment will commence within the hour. I want everyone to know, every minute we've held this ground, every ship we've taken down, every stand we've made, it all matters. We might not see tomorrow, but the galaxy will remember that." The response came back in fragments from dozens of positions across the burning colony. Voices of teachers who had become soldiers, children barely old enough to fight, elderly civilians who refused to hide while others bled, all of them united by the simple, impossible belief that some things were worth dying for. Above them, Admiral Zexal prepared to deliver the final lesson in Zephyrian superiority. The bombardment would be surgical, designed to collapse the remaining bunker systems while leaving the planet's infrastructure intact for future colonization. We had performed similar operations countless times, watching primitive civilizations learn the futility of resistance against the Empire's might. "Admiral," Commander Velthez called out, her voice carrying a note of confusion, "we're detecting an anomaly at the edge of sensor range, something large approaching from the outer system." Zexai turned toward the display, his 4 eyes narrowing as he studied the data. A single contact, moving at impossible speed through the system's asteroid field. The signature was unlike anything in their databases. Not Zephyrian, not human, not any known species in their extensive catalog of galactic civilizations. "Classification?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. The size readings are unusual. Our computers estimate a length of approximately 8 kilometers, but the energy output suggests something much larger. The drive signature doesn't match any known propulsion technology." For the first time in decades, Admiral Zexkai felt something approaching uncertainty. The Zephyrian Empire had cataloged every major spacefaring civilization in this sector of the galaxy. Their intelligence networks were vast and thorough. Nothing this large should exist without their knowledge. "Time to intercept? 14 minutes at current velocity, Admiral." "Whatever it is, it's coming directly toward our position." Zexai made a swift decision. "Battle Group Tertius will maintain bombardment positions. Groups Prima and Secunda will form an intercept formation. If this unknown vessel represents a threat, it dies before reaching engagement range." 200 Zephyrian warships began the elegant dance of repositioning, their crystalline hulls catching starlight as they moved to investigate this unexpected development. Their weapons charged to full power, ready to demonstrate the Empire's strength to whatever force dared to interrupt their conquest. On the surface of Kepler 442b, the humans noticed the change immediately. The constant rain of energy fire from orbit had ceased, and their instruments detected massive ship movements in the space above them. Captain Chen studied the readings with growing hope and confusion. "Sergeant, are you seeing this? Something big just entered the system, and the Zephyrs are moving to intercept." Martinez bent over his instruments, his scarred face reflecting the green glow of the displays. "Confirmed, ma'am. Whatever it is, it's huge. Bigger than anything in our database. The Zephyrians have committed 2/3 of their fleet to intercept." Around the bunker, human defenders began to whisper among themselves. Was this the rescue they had prayed for? Another alien civilization entering the conflict? Or something else entirely? Chen activated her communication system, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force. We are under siege and in desperate need of assistance. If you can hear this transmission, please respond." The response came not through their communication systems, but through the very fabric of space itself. A ripple passed through the system, a distortion that every sensor array detected but none could fully explain. It started. The unknown ship had done something to the fundamental structure of reality around it. Admiral Zexahay watched in growing alarm as his forward scouts reported their findings. The ship, if it could be called that, defied every principle of engineering the Zephyrians understood. Its hull appeared to be constructed from some form of metal unknown to Imperial science, but it moved through space as if mass and momentum were mere suggestions rather than laws. "Admiral," reported the lead scout captain, "visual confirmation achieved. The vessel, it appears to be of human origin, but the design is completely unknown. No ship this large exists in any human fleet records."
Impossible!
Zexai snarled. Humans lack the industrial capacity to construct capital ships. Their largest vessels are barely frigate class by our standards. "Sir, I'm transmitting visual data now." The holographic display shimmered and resolved into an image that made Zexai's four hearts skip a beat. The ship before them was indeed of human design. The angular, functional aesthetic was unmistakable, but it dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. 8 kilometers of armored hull bristled with weapons systems that seemed to incorporate technologies from dozens of different civilizations, welded together with the characteristic human disregard for elegant design principles. More disturbing than its size was its condition. The hull showed signs of countless battles, scars from energy weapons, impact craters from kinetic rounds, patches where sections had been rebuilt with different materials. This was not a fresh warship, but a veteran of conflicts that spanned decades, possibly centuries. "Admiral," Velthethes whispered, "the energy signatures are off the charts. That ship is generating more power than our entire fleet combined." As if responding to their scrutiny, the massive human vessel began to change. Weapon ports opened along its hull like awakening eyes, and energy began to build within systems that operated on principles the Zephyrians didn't recognize. The space around the ship began to distort, reality bending under the influence of technologies that seemed to mock the laws of physics. "All ships, this is Admiral Zexai," the commander broadcast to his fleet. "Prepare for combat. Whatever this vessel represents, it ends here." But even as he gave the order, Zexai felt a cold certainty settling in his minds. The Zephyrian Empire had built its power on the assumption that their technology was supreme, their tactics flawless, their victory inevitable. The ship before them challenged every one of those assumptions with its mere existence. On Kepler 442b, Captain Chen and her defenders watched the tactical displays with growing amazement. The unknown ship's response to their distress call had finally arrived, transmitted on a frequency they recognized as purely human in origin. The voice that emerged from their communication system was calm, almost conversational, despite the massive fleet of alien warships arrayed against it. "This is Captain Marcus Webb of the UES Prometheus. We received your distress signal approximately 6 months ago. Sorry we're late. We had to stop and pick up a few things on the way." Chen felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the truth. Humanity had not abandoned them. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, their people had been building, planning, preparing for this moment. The crude metal ships that the Zephyrians dismissed as primitive had evolved into something that made their crystalline perfection look like children's toys. "Captain Webb," she responded, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "This is Captain Sarah Chen, New Harmony Colonial Defense Force. We have approximately 40,000 civilians and 500 military personnel holding defensive positions. The Zephyrian fleet consists of 300 capital ships with supporting craft." There was a pause, and then Captain Webb's voice returned with what sounded suspiciously like amusement. "Copy that, Captain Chen. 300, you said? Well, that seems about right for a fair fight. Prometheus out." The massive human warship continued its approach, reality bending around it as systems beyond Zephyrian understanding powered up for battle. In the void between worlds, 2 philosophies of war were about to collide. The elegant, precise doctrine of the Empire against the chaotic, adaptive fury that humanity had perfected in its journey from one small world to the stars. The Zephyrians moved to intercept with the confidence of 3,000 years of victory. The humans came forward with something far more dangerous than confidence. They came with experience bought in blood among distant stars, with technology that turned desperation into innovation, and with the absolute certainty that some things were worth any sacrifice. The battlefield held its breath as 200 crystalline ships moved to engage one massive vessel that shouldn't exist, crewed by a species that refused to learn when they were beaten. In the space between them, history prepared to turn on its axis, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The first shots of what would later be known as the Battle of New Harmony came not from weapons, but from words transmitted across the void. Admiral Zexakai, following 3 millennia of Imperial protocol, opened communications with the unknown human vessel as his fleet moved into attack formation. Unidentified human vessel, this is Admiral Zexai of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet. You are interfering with a lawful siege operation against a rebellious colony. With trust, Teddy. With trust, consequences. The response came back within seconds, transmitted on an open frequency that every ship in both fleets could monitor. Captain Marcus Webb's voice carried the easy confidence of someone who had faced impossible odds so many times they had become routine. Admiral Zexay, this is Captain Marcus Webb of the United Earth ship Prometheus. I appreciate the warning, but I'm afraid I have orders to collect some citizens of the Terran Colonial Federation who seem to have gotten themselves into a bit of trouble. Since they're still shooting at my people down there, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. Zexay forearms moved in the gesture of supreme insult among his people. The audacity of this human was beyond comprehension. A single ship, no matter how large, challenging an entire Imperial battle fleet. Captain Webb, you face 300 ships of the line, each capable of reducing your vessel to component atoms. This is your final warning. 300? Webb's voice carried genuine interest. That's actually fewer than the hegemony threw at us over Proxima, or the Collective at the Battle of Wolf 359. Tell you what, Admiral, since you seem like a reasonable fellow, I'll give you one chance to withdraw. Take your ships and leave human space. This is the only offer you'll receive. The communications channel crackled with what sounded like suppressed laughter from the human vessel. Across the Zephyrian fleet, officers exchanged glances of disbelief. Never in the Empire's history had a single enemy ship demanded the withdrawal of an entire battle fleet. Admiral Zexahai terminated the communication channel with a gesture of finality. All ships, attack formation Delta 7. Fire at will. 200 crystalline warships opened fire simultaneously, their energy weapons painting space with deadly light. The concentrated barrage contained enough firepower to vaporize a small moon, directed with the precision that had made the Zephyrian Empire the dominant force in this sector of the galaxy. The human ship, Prometheus, disappeared behind a wall of exploding energy as dozens of beams found their target. For a moment, the entire battle fleet watched in satisfaction as their weapons struck home with devastating effect. Then the explosions cleared, and the impossible became reality. The Prometheus emerged from the barrage completely unharmed. Where Zephyrian energy weapons should have carved through metal and ceramic, they had instead struck some form of defensive barrier that absorbed and dissipated their power like water hitting stone. The massive ship continued its approach, apparently unbothered by an attack that should have reduced it to vapor. "Impossible," breathed Commander Valfez, studying her instruments in disbelief. "Our weapons achieved direct hits. The energy displacement readings confirm impact. Then why is that ship still intact?" Zexishay demanded, watching the tactical display with growing unease. His fleet had just delivered enough firepower to destroy a battle station. The answer came in the form of the Prometheus's response. The massive ship's weapon ports opened like awakening giants, revealing technology that seemed to operate on principles the Zephyrians couldn't comprehend. Energy began building within those weapons, not the clean, focused power of Imperial weapons, but something chaotic and adaptive that seemed to bend space around it. Captain Webb's voice returned to the communications channel, still maddeningly calm. "I have to admit, that was a pretty light show, Admiral. Our turn now." The Prometheus fired. What emerged from its weapons wasn't energy or projectiles in any traditional sense, but something that seemed to rewrite the fundamental laws of physics as it traveled through space. Streams of impossibility reached out from the human ship, and where they touched the Zephyrian vessels, reality simply changed. The first ship to be struck, the cruiser Crystal Harmony, didn't explode or disintegrate. Instead, it simply ceased to function as a spaceship. Its crystalline hull transformed into something that looked like organic metal, its weapon systems became decorative sculptures, and its propulsion drives turned into beautiful but useless art installations. The ship continued to exist, but it was no longer capable of warfare or much of anything else. A second cruiser, the Eternal Vigilance, found its entire hull restructured at the molecular level, where once its armor had been constructed from the Empire's finest battle-tested materials. It was now composed entirely of a substance that appeared to be crystallized music, beautiful, resonant, and absolutely useless for space combat. "What is happening?" HFY roared, watching his ships transform into impossible configurations. How are they doing this? The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep within the Prometheus hull, in a laboratory that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, Dr. Elena Vasquez monitored the battle through instruments that measured changes in the fundamental structure of reality itself. Her work had been decades in the making, built on technologies salvaged from a dozen conquered civilizations and refined through human ingenuity into something entirely new. "Reality manipulation is stable," she reported to Captain Webb through their internal communication system. "We're operating within acceptable parameters. The Zephyrian ships are being converted according to specification, rendered harmless but not destroyed." Webb nodded from his position on the bridge, where tactical displays showed the progress of the battle in real time. The Prometheus had been built not just as a warship, but as a demonstration of what humanity had learned during its brief but violent introduction to galactic politics. Every system, every weapon, every defensive capability incorporated lessons learned from battles against species far more advanced than these Zephyrians. "Continue conversion protocols," Webb ordered, "but keep an eye on their energy signatures. If any of them try to self-destruct, I want them converted to something harmless before they can endanger the planet below." The battle, if it could even be called that, continued in a fashion that defied every principle of space combat known to galactic civilization. The Zephyrian fleet threw everything they had at the Prometheus, unleashing weapons that had conquered star systems and reduced rebel fleets to cosmic dust. Each attack was absorbed by defensive systems that operated on technologies the Empire's scientists couldn't even categorize, let alone counter. In response, the Prometheus continued its methodical conversion of enemy vessels. Ship after ship found itself transformed into configurations that were beautiful, impossible, and completely non-threatening. Some became living art installations that sang mathematical equations in harmonious frequencies. Others were restructured into massive crystalline formations that generated pure poetry in languages that didn't exist. Admiral HFY watched his fleet disappear piece by piece, not through destruction but through transformation into forms that his mind couldn't fully process. The elegant crystalline ships that had been the pride of the Empire were becoming things that belonged in museums rather than battlefields. "Admiral," Commander Velthes reported, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, "we've lost 60% of our battle fleet. Not destroyed, converted. They still exist, but they're no longer functional as military vessels." "Ow," HFY demanded. "How is one ship defeating our entire fleet?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep space sensors detected new contacts at the edge of the system, not ships, but structures. Massive installations that materialized out of nothingness, their hulls bearing the distinctive angular design aesthetic of human engineering, but operating on technologies that made the Prometheus look primitive by comparison. "Admiral," the sensor officer called out, "we're detecting multiple large contacts appearing throughout the system. They're their manufacturing facilities, industrial complexes. It appears the humans have been building infrastructure in this system for months. The truth began to dawn on Zexay as he studied the incoming data. This wasn't a rescue mission by a single ship. This was a carefully orchestrated operation by a civilization that had been planning for this confrontation from the beginning. The humans hadn't just built one impossible warship, they had built an entire industrial infrastructure capable of producing them. Captain Webb's voice returned to the communications channel, and for the first time, there was something other than calm amusement in his tone. There was pride, and something that might have been sympathy. Admiral Zexai, I think it's time for a history lesson. 6 months ago, when your fleet began its siege of New Harmony, you probably thought you were dealing with a primitive species that had gotten lucky in a few skirmishes. You were operating under the assumption that humans were just another client race to be absorbed into your empire. The Prometheus continued its approach, reality bending around it as its impossible weapons continued their work of conversion. Around the system, more installations materialized. Shipyards, research facilities, entire cities floating in space, all bearing the marks of human construction but incorporating technologies that belonged in science fiction rather than reality. The thing is, Webb continued, humanity has been having a very educational 6 months. We've met 17 different species since leaving Earth, and every single one of them tried to conquer, enslave, or exterminate us. Funny thing about being the underdog in every fight, it really motivates you to get creative. More human ships began appearing at the edge of sensor range, but these weren't the crude metal vessels the Zephyrians expected. These were sleek, impossible things that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their hulls incorporating technologies salvaged from defeated enemies and refined by human desperation into something entirely new. Every species we've encountered has made the same mistake you're making now. Webb's voice carried across the battle space, reaching every ship in both fleets. They see our crude ships, our primitive technology, our small numbers, and they assume we're easy prey. What they don't understand is that humans don't just fight to win, we fight to learn. The conversion of the Zephyrian fleet accelerated as more human ships joined the battle. But rather than adding their firepower to the fight, they began deploying devices that Zexai's instruments couldn't classify. Space around the battle zone began to change, reality itself being restructured according to principles that seemed to mock everything the Empire understood about physics. Every weapon fired at us, we analyze and adapt to. Every tactic used against us, we incorporate into our own doctrine. Every technology we encounter, we improve upon. You've been fighting the same wars for 3,000 years, Admiral. We've been evolving for 3,000 days. On the surface of Kepler, 442b Captain Chen and her defenders watched the battle through instruments that could barely comprehend what they were seeing. The Zephyrian fleet, that had held them under siege for months, was being systematically neutralized by technologies that seemed to operate on principles beyond current understanding. Ma'am, Sergeant Martinez called from his position, I'm reading massive energy signatures from orbit. Whatever the Prometheus is doing up there, it's working. Zephyrian ship conversion rate is at 70% and climbing. Chen nodded, still hardly daring to believe what was happening. The rescue she had prayed for was exceeding her wildest dreams. This wasn't just salvation. It was a demonstration of what humanity had become during its brief but violent introduction to galactic politics. Above them, the battle reached its conclusion as the last Zephyrian ships found themselves converted into forms that were beautiful, impossible, and completely harmless. Admiral Zexai's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, had become a massive crystalline structure that generated pure mathematics in visual form. Stunning to observe, but utterly useless for warfare. Captain Webb's voice filled the void one final time, addressing the converted fleet with something that might have been respect. Admiral Zexai, your ships and crews are unharmed, but they're no longer capable of military action. You'll find that your vessels have been converted into research and cultural facilities. Consider it a gift from humanity to the galaxy, proof that there are alternatives to conquest. The Prometheus settled into orbit above Kepler. 442b, its massive bulk casting shadows across the planet's surface. Around the system, human installations continued to materialize, revealing the true scope of what humanity had accomplished during its forced evolution from planetary species to galactic power. The siege of New Harmony was over, but the real story was just beginning. The galaxy had just received its introduction to what happened when a species that refused to surrender met technologies they didn't understand. They learned, they adapted, and they emerged stronger than anyone thought possible. 442b, the converted Zephyrian fleet, drifted in configurations that challenged every assumption about what was possible. And somewhere in the vast darkness beyond, other species were about to learn the same lesson that Admiral Zexahay was learning now. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The silence that followed the end of active combat was unlike anything Admiral Zexahay had experienced in 3 centuries of military service. His flagship, the Eternal Dominion, had been transformed into something his mind struggled to categorize. Where once the bridge had been a precisely engineered command center, it was now a space that existed in several dimensions simultaneously, its surfaces displaying mathematical equations that seemed to describe the fundamental structure of reality itself. Zexahay found himself able to move freely through the transformed ship, but every system that had once made the vessel a weapon of war had been converted into something else entirely. His weapons had become instruments that generated music from cosmic background radiation. His shields had transformed into devices that painted aurora patterns in the vacuum of space. The ship still existed, still functioned, but it was no longer capable of violence. "Admiral," Commander Velthus reported from her own position within the restructured bridge, "I'm receiving communication requests from all ships. The crews are unharmed but confused. Their vessels have been changed." "I can see that," Zexahay replied grimly, studying the impossible architecture that surrounded him. The human ship Prometheus hung in space before them like a monument to technologies that shouldn't exist. Around the system, more human installations continued to materialize, vast industrial complexes that seemed to have been constructed in pocket dimensions and were only now being revealed to normal space. A communication channel opened without Zexahay's permission, the technology that managed it operating on principles his people didn't understand. Captain Webb's voice filled the transformed bridge, but now there was less amusement in his tone and something that might have been weariness. "Admiral Zexahay, I hope your accommodations are acceptable. I know the conversion process can be disorienting, but your ships and crews are completely safe. In fact, they're probably safer now than they've been in decades." "What have you done to us?" Zexahay demanded, his forearms moving in gestures of frustrated authority that no longer held any meaning. "That's a complicated question," Webb replied. "The simple answer is that we've converted your ships into something more useful than weapons of war. The longer answer requires a history lesson that I suspect you won't enjoy." The tactical displays around the transformed bridge flickered and changed, now showing information that Zexahay's people had never been permitted to see. Star charts marking the locations of species that had mysteriously vanished from galactic communication, battle sites where entire fleets had disappeared without trace, records of civilizations that had simply stopped existing, their worlds empty but undamaged. "For the past 6 months, while your fleet has been conducting its siege of New Harmony, humanity has been having a very educational experience," Webb continued. "We've encountered 17 different spacefaring civilizations, and every single one of them attempted to conquer, enslave, or exterminate us. Funny thing about being attacked by 17 different species, you start to notice patterns. The displays showed battle footage that made Zexahay's 4 hearts skip beats. Human ships recognizably crude and primitive, engaging fleets that dwarfed them in size and capability. But these weren't the hopeless last stands that logic dictated they should be. These were learning experiences, each battle showing human technology adapting and evolving at rates that defied everything the Empire understood about technological development. The hegemony tried to subjugate us with superior firepower," We learned to build better weapons. The collective attempted to overwhelm us with numbers. We discovered how to make reality work for us instead of against us. The syndicate tried to corrupt our technology with computer viruses. We figured out how to make our systems immune to digital interference. Each example was accompanied by visual evidence that challenged Zex's understanding of what was possible. Damage that rebuilt themselves after taking damage. Weapons that improved their effectiveness by analyzing enemy defenses. Defensive systems that didn't just stop attacks but transformed them into useful energy. Every species we've encountered has made the same fundamental error. Webb's voice carried a note of something that might have been sadness. They've assumed that technological superiority equals victory. They've forgotten that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with better weapons, it's the one who learns faster. The truth began to crystallize in Zex's minds as he studied the evidence before him. Humanity hadn't just survived their encounters with superior civilizations, they had absorbed their technologies, incorporated their tactics, and emerged stronger from each conflict. The crude metal ships that had first appeared in Zephyrian space had been learning experiences, gathering data on Imperial weapons and defenses that had then been used to develop countermeasures.
The Prometheus isn't just a warship, Webb explained as if reading Zex's thoughts.
It's a mobile research facility, a testing ground for technologies we've acquired from 17 different species and refined through human engineering. Every system on this ship incorporates lessons learned from battles against opponents who should have destroyed us. The communication channel shifted, and suddenly Zex found himself looking at the interior of the Prometheus bridge. What he saw there challenged every assumption he had made about human capabilities. The command center was vast beyond reason, its walls lined with displays showing information from across the galaxy. Human officers moved between stations that incorporated technologies from dozens of different civilizations, all working together in ways that seemed to mock the laws of physics. But more disturbing than the technology was the people operating it. These weren't the primitive savages that Zephyrian intelligence had described. These were individuals who moved with the calm competence of beings who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious so many times that it had become routine. Their equipment was a bizarre mixture of human engineering and alien technology, but it all functioned together with seamless efficiency. "Admiral," Captain Webb said, his image appearing on the transformed displays, "I want to show you something that I think you need to understand." The scene shifted to show a star system that Zex recognized from Imperial records, one of the most powerful civilizations in this sector of the galaxy, or rather, what had been their home system. The massive ring world that had housed their civilization was still there, but it was no longer the militaristic fortress it had once been. Instead, it had been converted into something that defied categorization, part research facility, part cultural center, part monument to technologies that operated on principles beyond current understanding. "The hegemony attacked us 3 months ago," Webb explained. 50,000 ships commanded by beings who had conquered half this sector of the galaxy. They demanded our immediate surrender and the transfer of all human technology to their collective. When we refused, they attempted to demonstrate their superiority by destroying one of our colonies. The display showed the aftermath of that demonstration, not the destroyed colony the hegemony had intended to create, but something else entirely. The human settlement had been protected by defensive systems that seemed to operate on principles that made Zephyrian shielding technology look primitive. The hegemon attack had been absorbed, analyzed, and ultimately converted into useful energy that powered the colony's expansion. That's when we learned our first important lesson about galactic politics, Webb continued. Technological superiority means nothing if you're not willing to adapt. The hegemony had been using the same weapons, the same tactics, the same strategies for thousands of years. They had grown comfortable with their dominance. They had forgotten how to evolve. The battle footage that followed showed what happened when a species that had perfected the art of adaptation met one that had grown comfortable with stagnation. The hegemon fleet, for all its size and power, had been systematically dismantled by human ships that seemed to learn from each attack and develop countermeasures in real time. "We didn't destroy them," Webb said, and his voice carried something that might have been regret. "Destruction is waste, and humans have learned that you can't afford to waste anything when you're outnumbered by the entire galaxy. Instead, we converted their civilization into something more useful." The images showed the transformed hegemon worlds, no longer militaristic fortress systems, but centers of research and culture where former warriors now worked on projects that seemed to involve fundamental research into the nature of reality itself. It was beautiful, impossible. The same thing happened with the Collective, the Syndicate, and 14 other species who made the mistake of assuming that humans would be easy prey, Webb explained. "Each time we learned something new. Each time we emerged stronger. Each time we gave our former enemies the chance to become something better than conquerors." Sci-Fi felt a cold certainty settling in his mind as he began to understand the true scope of what humanity had accomplished. This wasn't just a rescue mission or even a retaliatory strike. This was the expansion of a civilization that had learned to turn every attack into an opportunity for growth, every enemy into a teacher, every battle into a stepping stone towards something unprecedented in galactic history. "Admiral," Webb said, his image leaning forward with an expression of what might have been sympathy, "your empire has existed for 3,000 years, built on the principle that superior technology equals the right to rule. You've conquered hundreds of worlds, absorbed dozens of species, and expanded your borders across dozens of star systems. It's an impressive achievement." The tactical displays shifted again, now showing the full extent of Zephyrian space. Hundreds of star systems, thousands of worlds, billions of beings living under Imperial rule. It represented the work of millennia, the accumulated power of one of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. "The problem is that you've been fighting the same wars for 3,000 years, Webb continued. "Your weapons are more refined than they were when your empire began. Your ships are faster and stronger. Your tactics are more sophisticated. But fundamentally, you're still operating according to the same principles your ancestors used when they first left their homeworld." The comparison that followed was devastating. With Trust Teddy, side-by-side images showed Zephyrian technology from the beginning of their empire compared to their current systems. The improvements were obvious but incremental, better versions of the same basic concepts. Next to that, Webb showed humanity's technological development over the past 6 months. The progression was impossible, defying everything Sci-Fi understood about how civilizations developed. From crude chemical rockets to ships that operated on principles that challenged the laws of physics, from simple kinetic weapons to devices that could restructure reality itself, from planetary settlements to industrial complexes that existed in pocket dimensions. 6 months ago, the most powerful weapon in the human arsenal was a nuclear missile, Webb said quietly. Today we have devices that can convert matter into pure information, transmit it across galactic distances instantaneously, and reconstitute it wherever we need it. We've learned to make space and time work for us instead of against us. We've figured out how to turn the fundamental forces of the universe into tools for construction rather than destruction. The implications of what Webb was saying began to sink in. Humanity hadn't just survived their introduction to galactic politics. They had evolved beyond the point where traditional concepts of military power had any meaning. They had become something that existed outside the normal rules of civilization, a species that grew stronger with every challenge they faced. "So here's what's going to happen now," Webb said, his voice returning to the calm, almost conversational tone he had used at the beginning of the battle. "Your ships will remain converted, but your crews are free to return to your homeworlds. Take with you everything you've seen here. Show your people the records of this battle, the evidence of what humanity has become." The communication channel shifted one final time, showing the Prometheus as it hung in space above Kepler. 442b. But now Sci-Fi could see details that his instruments hadn't been able to detect earlier. The ship wasn't just large, it was impossible, its hull existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its weapons operating on principles that seemed to rewrite physics with each shot fired. "Tell your emperor that humanity has a message for the Zephyrian Empire," Webb concluded. "We're not interested in conquest or domination. We don't want to rule your worlds or subjugate your people. But we also won't tolerate attacks on human colonies or civilians." Around the system, more human installations continued to materialize, revealing an industrial infrastructure that could construct fleets like the Prometheus as easily as the Empire built scout ships. The message was clear. This demonstration of power was just the beginning of what humanity could accomplish when properly motivated. "The galaxy is changing, Admiral," Webb said. "The old rules, that might makes right, that superior technology equals the right to rule, those principles are becoming obsolete. Humanity is offering something different. The choice of what your people do with that offer is yours to make." The journey back to the Zephyrian Empire took Admiral Zexhay 14 days aboard a human transport vessel that defied every principle of physics he thought he understood. The ship, designated as a diplomatic courier by its crew, traveled through space by folding reality around itself, covering distances that should have taken months in mere hours. The technology was offered freely, with human engineers explaining its principles to any Zephyrian officer interested in learning. What disturbed Zexhay more than the impossible technology was the attitude of the humans operating it. They showed no trace of the arrogance he expected from conquerors, no sense of superiority despite their overwhelming technological advantage. Instead, they treated their former enemies with the casual courtesy of beings who had moved beyond the need to prove their power through intimidation. "Admiral," Captain Liu of the transport Harmony had said during their departure, "I want you to understand something about what you witnessed at New Harmony. That wasn't humanity showing off or trying to intimidate anyone. That was us being careful." The statement haunted Zexhay during the journey home. If the systematic neutralization of 300 warships using impossible weapons was humanity being careful, what did their full capabilities look like? The records Webb had shared suggested that the Prometheus was just one ship in a fleet whose size and power remained classified even from allies. When they finally reached the imperial capital of Zephyros Prime, Zexhay found a civilization in chaos. Word of the fleet's defeat had somehow preceded him, spreading through communication networks faster than traditional FTL travel should have allowed. The crystalline spires that housed the Empire's government gleamed in the light of their twin suns, but the usually orderly flow of imperial business had been disrupted by emergency sessions and crisis meetings. Emperor Vashti the Eternal received Zexhay in the Crystal Throne Chamber, a vast space where the accumulated wisdom of 3,000 years was literally embedded in the walls as crystalline memory matrices. The Emperor himself was ancient even by Zephyrian standards, his forearms moving with the measured precision of someone who had guided an empire through countless crises. "Admiral," the Emperor said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the crystalline chamber, "we have received preliminary reports of your encounter with the humans. These reports strain credibility. 300 ships of the line neutralized by a single enemy vessel, using weapons that our scientists claim are physically impossible." Zexhay activated the portable display unit the humans had provided, its technology seamlessly interfacing with the chamber's ancient systems despite operating on completely different principles. The holographic projectors filled the space with three-dimensional recordings of the battle, showing in precise detail the systematic conversion of the Imperial fleet. "Your Eternal Majesty," Zexhay said formally, "the recordings are accurate and unaltered. The human vessel Prometheus neutralized our entire battle fleet, using weapons that operate outside our understanding of physical law. Moreover, the ship represented only a small fraction of human capabilities in this system." The Emperor watched in silence as the recording showed the impossible, Zephyrian ships transforming into structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, weapons that could restructure matter at the atomic level, defensive systems that absorbed and redirected attacks without apparent energy cost. The crystalline walls of the chamber hummed with harmonics as the memory matrices attempted to process information that challenged their fundamental programming.
Explain!
The Emperor commanded, his forearms moving in the gesture that demanded complete honesty from his subordinates. For the next 3 hours, HFY provided a complete briefing on humanity's apparent evolution from primitive spacefaring species to something that operated outside traditional concepts of galactic power. He shared Webb's historical records, showing the 17 different civilizations that had attempted to conquer humanity and emerged transformed instead of victorious. Each species they encountered, HFY explained, approached the humans with the assumption that technological superiority would guarantee victory. Each discovered that humans possess an apparently unlimited capacity for rapid adaptation and learning. They don't just defend against attacks, they absorb the knowledge behind those attacks and use it to develop superior countermeasures. The Emperor's four eyes studied the data with the intensity of someone who had spent millennia learning to evaluate threats to his empire. The tactical analyses were clear. Humanity had evolved beyond the point where traditional military force had any meaning. They had developed technologies that operated on principles that made conventional weapons systems look primitive. What do they want? The Emperor asked finally. What are their terms for our survival? That's the most disturbing aspect of this entire situation, Your Majesty, HFY replied. They don't want anything. Captain Webb was quite explicit. Humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. They simply won't tolerate attacks on their people or territory. A new voice entered the conversation as the chamber's main communication system activated. High Scientist Mordeth, the Empire's chief researcher, had been monitoring the briefing from his laboratory complex on the far side of the capital city. His image appeared as a shimmering hologram among the crystalline memory matrices. Your Majesty, Mordeth said, his scientific excitement overriding normal protocol. I've completed my preliminary analysis of the human technology samples that Admiral HFY was permitted to bring back. The implications are staggering. The scientist's data streamed across the chamber's displays, showing molecular analyses of materials that shouldn't exist. The human ship hulls were constructed from substances that existed in quantum superposition, allowing them to be simultaneously solid and energy depending on need. Their weapons operated by manipulating fundamental forces at scales smaller than atoms, essentially rewriting the local laws of physics to achieve desired effects. More concerning, Mordeth continued, is the rate of development these technologies represent. Based on the humans' own records, they achieved all of this advancement in approximately 6 months of active conflict. Their learning curve isn't just steep, it's effectively vertical. The Emperor processed this information with the calculating mind that had kept the Zephyrian Empire stable for over a century. The strategic implications were clear. Humanity represented a power that grew stronger with every challenge it faced. Traditional concepts of military deterrence had no meaning against a species that could turn attacks into learning experiences and emerge stronger from each encounter. Admiral HFY, the Emperor said finally, what is your professional assessment of our military options? HFY had been dreading this question during the entire journey home. As a military officer, he was trained to evaluate threats and develop strategies for neutralizing them. But humanity represented something outside traditional strategic analysis, a civilization that had evolved beyond the point where conventional military thinking applied. Your Majesty, he said carefully, every weapon we used against them was analyzed, understood, and countered within minutes. Their defensive systems appear to be designed specifically to learn from attacks and develop immunity to them. The chamber fell silent as the full implications of this assessment settled over the assembled leadership. The Zephyrian Empire had built its power on military superiority, but they faced an enemy for whom military action was counterproductive. Each attack would only make them stronger. What alternatives do we have? The Emperor asked. Before HFY could answer, the chamber's communication systems activated again. This time, the source was not from within the Empire, but from deep space. a transmission from the human ship Prometheus, somehow reaching across galactic distances instantaneously. Captain Webb's image appeared among the crystalline displays, his expression calm and respectful despite the obvious technological superiority required to penetrate the Empire's most secure communication systems without invitation. "Emperor Vashti," Webb said, somehow knowing exactly who he was addressing, "I apologize for the intrusion, but I felt it was important to speak with you directly about the situation between our peoples." The Emperor's forearms moved in gestures of controlled outrage. The violation of Imperial communication security was an act of war by any traditional definition, yet Webb had accomplished it so casually that it seemed more like a demonstration than an attack. "Captain Webb," the Emperor replied with forced calm, "you have violated sovereign space and compromised secure Imperial communications. These actions constitute—" "Acts of war, yes," Webb interrupted gently. "Under traditional galactic law, you would be within your rights to respond with military force. However, I think we both understand that traditional concepts of military force have limited applicability to our current situation." Webb's image moved through the chamber's displays as if he were physically present, his instrument somehow providing him with detailed scans of the most secure location in the Zephyrian Empire. The casual violation of their defenses was more intimidating than any direct threat could have been. "I'm contacting you now," Webb continued, "because I believe there's an opportunity for our civilizations to coexist peacefully, but that opportunity requires honest communication about what humanity has become and what that means for the galaxy." The Emperor gestured for his guards to stand down as they moved to respond to this unprecedented intrusion. Whatever weapons they carried would be useless against technology that could project images across galactic distances and penetrate the Empire's most sophisticated security systems. "Speak," the Emperor commanded. "6 months ago," Webb began, "humanity was a primitive spacefaring species with a few dozen colonies and technology that your empire would classify as barely above chemical rockets. Today we operate industrial complexes that exist in pocket dimensions, command ships that can restructure reality at will, and possess defensive capabilities that make conventional weapons obsolete." The displays around the chamber filled with images that made Zexai's four hearts race. Vast human installations floating in the void between stars, ships that dwarfed the Prometheus, research facilities that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The scope of human expansion in just 6 months was beyond anything the Empire had achieved in centuries. "This transformation," Webb continued, "was not planned or anticipated. It was forced upon us by species who assumed that our apparent primitive nature made us easy prey. Every attack we faced taught us something new. Every enemy we encountered provided technologies and techniques that we incorporated into our own development." The chamber's memory matrices hummed with increasing intensity as they attempted to process the implications of what Webb was describing. Humanity hadn't just survived their introduction to galactic politics, they had used it as a catalyst for evolutionary advancement that defied everything the Empire understood about how civilizations developed. "The result," Webb said, his tone becoming more serious, "is that humanity has evolved into something that operates outside traditional galactic power structures. We don't need to conquer territory because we can create our own space. We don't need to fight for resources because we can transmute matter at the atomic level. We don't need to impose our will through force because we've learned to make reality itself work according to our needs." The Emperor studied Webb's image with growing unease. This wasn't the speech of a conqueror or the demands of a superior power. This was something more disturbing. The explanation of a species that had moved beyond the need for traditional power structures entirely. "What do you want from us?" the Emperor asked directly. "Nothing," Webb replied, and his tone made it clear that this was literal truth. Humanity has no interest in ruling the Zephyrian Empire or any other galactic civilization. We've moved beyond the need for conquest or domination. What we offer instead is coexistence based on mutual respect and the opportunity for peaceful exchange of knowledge and culture. The chamber fell silent as the assembled leadership processed this offer. An empire built on 3,000 years of expansion and conquest was being offered friendship by a species that had demonstrated the ability to neutralize their entire military in minutes. However, Webb continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, this offer comes with one non-negotiable condition. Humanity will not tolerate attacks on our people or colonies. Any attempt to use military force against human settlements will result in the systematic conversion of the attacking fleet, as demonstrated at New Harmony. The threat was delivered without emotion or anger, making it somehow more intimidating than any declaration of war. This wasn't bravado or posturing. It was a simple statement of fact from a species that had demonstrated the capability to make good on such promises. Emperor Vashti, Webb concluded, the choice of how the Zephyrian Empire responds to this new reality is yours to make, but I wanted you to understand exactly what that choice entails before you make it. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in silence broken only by the harmonic hum of crystalline memory matrices processing information that challenged everything the Empire believed about galactic politics. The Emperor sat motionless for long minutes, his four minds working through strategic calculations that had no precedent in Imperial history. Finally, he spoke. Admiral Zexai, prepare a formal communication to all Imperial fleets. Until further notice, no Imperial vessel will approach human space or colonies. High Scientist Mordith, begin analysis of peaceful applications for the technologies the humans have shared. We must understand what this new galaxy looks like before we can determine our place in it. Decisions made in that crystalline chamber would ripple across the Zephyrian Empire and beyond, as one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations grappled with the reality that the fundamental rules of galactic politics had changed. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. 1 year later, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Ambassador Sarah Chen, former Colonial Defense Force captain and survivor of the Siege of New Harmony, stood on the observation deck of the Terra Firma, humanity's first purpose-built diplomatic vessel, watching the impossible sight of former enemies working together in the void of space. Before her stretched the construction site of what the humans had designated as the Galactic Cooperation Initiative, a massive space station that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously and served as the first truly neutral meeting ground in recorded galactic history. The station itself was a marvel that challenged every conventional understanding of engineering. Zephyrian crystalline technology formed the structural backbone, its elegant curves and precise geometry providing stability across multiple dimensions. Human reality manipulation systems allowed different sections to exist in pocket universes tailored to the environmental needs of various species. Hegemony collective consciousness networks facilitated communication between beings whose thought processes operated on fundamentally different principles. It's remarkable, said Ambassador Velfathes, the former Zephyrian commander who had served as Admiral Zexai's second during the Battle of New Harmony. She had volunteered for the unprecedented position of first non-human diplomatic liaison to humanity. 6 months ago, these civilizations were attempting to destroy each other. Today, they're collaborating on projects that none of them could have accomplished alone. Chen nodded, still sometimes finding it difficult to believe the transformation that had swept across this sector of the galaxy. The demonstration at New Harmony had indeed marked the beginning of something unprecedented, but not in the way anyone had expected. Humanity's overwhelming technological superiority had not led to conquest or domination, but to something far more revolutionary: the voluntary transformation of galactic civilization itself. Captain Webb certainly kept his word about humanity not being interested in conquest, Chen replied, watching as work crews from a dozen different species collaborated on installing environmental systems for the station's cultural exchange wing. The sight of former enemies working together with casual efficiency was something that still amazed her, even after months of witnessing such cooperation. The transformation had begun with the Zephyrian Empire's decision to accept humanity's offer of peaceful coexistence. Emperor Vashti's announcement had sent shockwaves through galactic political structures that had remained stable for millennia. Within weeks, other civilizations had begun reaching out to humanity, some seeking alliance, others hoping to understand how they had achieved such rapid technological advancement. The key, as it turned out, was humanity's willingness to share. The integration protocols are proceeding ahead of schedule, reported Dr. Chess. Elena Vasquez, from her position at one of the station's reality manipulation control centers. Her research into the fundamental nature of space-time had been the foundation for most of humanity's impossible technologies, and she had become the galaxy's leading expert on what was being called adaptive engineering, the human ability to combine technologies from multiple civilizations into systems that exceeded the capabilities of any individual component. The hegemony collective consciousness networks have successfully interfaced with Zephyrian memory matrices and human quantum processors, Dr. Vasquez continued. We're achieving computational capabilities that none of our species could reach independently. More importantly, we're developing understanding of physical principles that were beyond any single civilization's comprehension. This was the heart of what had made the galactic transformation possible. Humanity had not hoarded the technologies they had developed during their violent introduction to galactic politics. Instead, they had shared them freely, offering to teach other civilizations the principles of adaptive engineering that had made their rapid advancement possible. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. The Zephyrians, with their 3,000 years of accumulated knowledge and precision engineering, had proven to be natural students of human adaptive techniques. Their ability to create stable, long-lasting structures perfectly complemented humanity's talent for rapid innovation and modification. Together, they had developed technologies that seemed to operate on principles that belonged in theoretical physics rather than practical engineering. The Hegemony Collective, once a militaristic confederation dedicated to expansion through force, had discovered that their collective consciousness networks could be used for unprecedented collaborative research. When combined with human reality manipulation technology and Zephyrian memory storage systems, they had achieved breakthroughs in fundamental science that advanced the understanding of all three civilizations by centuries. Ambassador Chen, called out Engineer Torres from his position near the station's main construction interface, we're receiving a priority communication from the Prometheus. Captain Webb requests a conference call with all senior staff. Chen made her way to the station's primary communication center, a space that existed simultaneously in normal space-time and 3 pocket dimensions designed to facilitate communication across galactic distances. The technology still amazed her. 6 months ago, instantaneous communication between star systems had been impossible. Today, it was routine. Captain Webb's image appeared in the center of the chamber, his expression carrying the mixture of satisfaction and concern that had become characteristic of human leadership during this period of unprecedented change. Behind him, the bridge of the Prometheus hummed with activity as crews from multiple species worked together on projects that none of them could fully understand individually. Ambassador Chen, colleagues, Webb said formally, I wanted to update you on the results of our diplomatic mission to the Outer Reach systems. The response has been interesting. The display filled with star charts showing the galaxy's outer spiral arms, where older civilizations had established themselves in isolation from the more chaotic politics of the inner systems. These were species that had observed the recent changes with growing alarm, concerned about the implications of humanity's rapid technological advancement. The Eternal Concord has formally requested a demonstration of human technologies, Webb reported. They're concerned about the rate of change we've introduced to galactic civilization. They want to understand whether humanity represents a threat to long-term galactic stability. Chen felt a familiar tension settling in her stomach. The Eternal Concord was old, older than the Zephyrian Empire, older than most spacefaring civilizations in this sector of the galaxy. They had achieved stability through careful control of technological advancement, limiting change to preserve the delicate balance of power that had kept the galaxy relatively peaceful for millennia. "What's their specific concern?" asked Ambassador Velthes, her crystalline features reflecting the starlight streaming through the station's observation ports. "They're worried that unlimited technological advancement will lead to galactic-scale conflicts," Webb replied. "Their models suggest that civilizations advancing at the rate humanity has demonstrated will inevitably come into conflict with established powers, potentially destabilizing the entire galactic political structure." The concern was understandable, Chen reflected. In just 1 year, humanity had advanced from a primitive spacefaring species to something that operated outside traditional concepts of military and economic power. That rate of change would be alarming to civilizations that had spent millennia perfecting stable, sustainable approaches to galactic politics. "What are you planning to tell them?" Chen asked. Webb's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. "The truth. That they're absolutely correct to be concerned about unlimited technological advancement leading to galactic conflicts. That's exactly what would happen if humanity were operating according to traditional galactic power structures." The chamber fell silent as the implications of Webb's statement settled over the assembled representatives. After a year of unprecedented cooperation and peaceful advancement, the reminder that humanity possessed the capability for unprecedented destruction was sobering. "However," Webb continued, "I'm also going to explain why their concern is based on outdated assumptions about how galactic civilizations interact. The Eternal Concord is operating under the belief that technological advancement inevitably leads to competition for limited resources and territory. They haven't yet understood that humanity has moved beyond the need for resource competition." Dr. Vasquez activated one of the chamber's secondary displays, showing readouts from humanity's industrial complexes scattered throughout the local systems. The production capabilities represented there were staggering. Matter transmutation facilities that could convert asteroids into any material needed. Pocket dimension manufacturing centers that operated outside normal space-time constraints. Energy collection systems that drew power directly from stellar cores without affecting the stars themselves. "The galaxy's traditional power structures are based on scarcity," Dr. Vasquez explained. "With civilizations fight for control of worlds, resources, strategic positions, because there aren't enough of these things to go around. But when you can create pocket dimensions for living space, transmute matter for resources, and travel instantaneously between star systems, the concept of scarcity becomes meaningless." This was the revolution that humanity had brought to galactic civilization. Not just new technologies, but a completely different approach to existence itself. When resource limitations disappeared, the motivation for conquest disappeared with them. When any civilization could create whatever they needed, traditional concepts of military and economic power became obsolete. "The demonstration for the Eternal Concord," Webb said, "will focus on showing them how unlimited technological advancement can actually increase galactic stability rather than threatening it. When civilizations no longer need to compete for resources." Chen found herself thinking about the human colonies that had been established throughout the local systems during the past year. Each one was a marvel of adaptive engineering, combining technologies from multiple civilizations to create settlements that existed in harmony with their environments rather than exploiting them. More importantly, each colony was designed to be completely self-sufficient while contributing to the advancement of galactic knowledge. "There's something else," Webb continued, his expression becoming more serious. "Long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures from the galactic core. Something big is happening in the central systems, something that involves technologies we don't recognize." The display shifted to show readings from the galaxy's innermost regions, where the oldest and most mysterious civilizations were rumored to dwell. Metrics were unlike anything in humanity's extensive database of galactic technologies, operating on scales that dwarfed even the most advanced human installations. "Our analysis suggests that whatever's happening at the galactic core represents a response to the changes we've introduced to local galactic civilization," Dr. Vasquez reported. The energy signatures began appearing approximately 6 months ago, coinciding with the establishment of the first interspecies collaborative research facilities. Chen felt a chill of premonition. Humanity's introduction to galactic politics had begun with 17 different species attempting to conquer them. Each encounter had resulted in humanity growing stronger and their former enemies becoming allies. But the civilizations at the galactic core were older, more powerful, and potentially more dangerous than anything humanity had yet encountered. "What's the estimated time frame before whatever's happening at the core reaches our local systems?" she asked. "Unknown," Webb replied. "The distances involved make traditional analysis impossible, and the technologies being used operate outside our current understanding of physics. But based on the rate of energy buildup, we estimate we have between 6 months and 2 years before we find out what the core civilizations have been preparing." The chamber fell silent as the assembled representatives contemplated this new challenge. The past year had been a period of unprecedented peace and cooperation, but the galaxy was vast, and humanity had only encountered a tiny fraction of the civilizations that called it home. "I want all research facilities to begin developing contingency protocols," Webb continued. "If the core civilizations represent a threat to our local alliance, we need to be prepared to defend not just humanity, but all the species that have joined us in this experiment in peaceful cooperation." Ambassador Valfestus moved her 4 arms in the Zephyrian gesture of solemn commitment. "The Empire stands ready to contribute all necessary resources to our mutual defense. Whatever emerges from the galactic core will face not just humanity, but a coalition of civilizations that have learned to combine their strengths." Chen nodded, feeling the familiar determination that had carried her through the siege of New Harmony. Humanity had learned many things during their brief but intense introduction to galactic politics, but perhaps the most important lesson was that they were stronger when they worked together with others than when they fought alone. "Then let's get to work," she said, looking out at the construction teams that continued their collaborative efforts despite the uncertainty ahead. "Whatever's coming from the galactic core, it's going to find a galaxy that's very different from the one it might remember." The observation deck of the terra firma hummed with renewed activity as representatives from multiple civilizations began coordinating their response to this new challenge. Outside, the stars continued to shine with the same light they had cast for billions of years, but the civilizations that dwelt among them had been fundamentally transformed. Humanity had indeed arrived in the galaxy, but they had brought with them something more valuable than superior weapons or advanced technology. They had brought the revolutionary idea that different civilizations could work together to become something greater than any of them could achieve alone. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what would emerge from that collaboration when it was truly tested. In the vast darkness between the stars, ancient powers were stirring, drawn by the unprecedented changes that had swept through local galactic civilization. Soon the true test of humanity's revolution would begin, but for now, in the space around a dozen star systems, former enemies worked together on projects that would have been impossible for any single civilization to accomplish. Ships that operated on principles from multiple technological traditions patrolled the void. Research stations where scientists from a dozen species collaborated on fundamental questions about the nature of reality itself. The battlefield that had once held its breath watching humanity's warship arrive in glory had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a place where different civilizations had chosen cooperation over conquest, mutual advancement over domination. The galaxy would never be the same again, and somewhere among the stars, ancient powers were about to learn what humanity and their allies had accomplished during one remarkable year of peace.